Welcome to the Zeducation podcast, where it's all about helping people and organizations unleash their greatness. The Zeducation podcast features lively discussions.
When they share it, you see that they're beginning to feel empowered.
My heart, it's full of pride for me to be at Maitai Samoa.
You don't necessarily need a degree these days. There's so many pathways to success.
Welcome to the Zeducation podcast. Every successful business, organization, and movement has one thing in common: a high-performing team. But building one isn't just about hiring the right people, it's about leadership, culture, and knowing how to bring out the best in those around you. Whether you're leading a business, managing a team, or just trying to create a motivated and engaging workplace, leadership isn't just about strategy, it's about people. So how do you build a team that's not just productive, but truly engaged? How do you lead in a way that inspires loyalty, accountability, and excellence? Today's guest, Liam Brady, has spent years leading and scaling teams across fitness, healthcare, hospitality, and retail. Now, as CEO of Planet Fitness New Zealand, he's taking his leadership expertise to the next level, growing high-performance teams that deliver results while creating a culture where people love to work. With experience managing hundreds of employees across multiple industries, he knows what works and what doesn't. Hey everyone, welcome to the Zeducation podcast. Before we dive in, I have a quick favor to ask you. If you enjoy the show and get value from it, help us grow by sharing it. Send it to a friend, post it on social media, and don't forget to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. The bigger this community gets, the more powerful conversations we can bring you, or to help you unlock new levels of success in your personal and professional life. Thanks for being here, and now let's get into the episode. Okay, Liam, thank you for coming onto the show today. Before we get into it, share something interesting about yourself for our audience.
Yeah, I'm on a board of Man Alive, so they're a non-for-profit charity. We specialise in providing counselling and therapy services to young boys and men out in West Auckland. So yeah, pretty stoked to be a part of such a good organisation, and yeah, things are ticking along quite nicely with that.
That's awesome. And that's something that you do outside of your day-to-day.
That's right. Yeah. Also do the odd marathon, background in kickboxing, and yeah, pretty active. So yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, thank you for doing that work. It's definitely much needed outside of your BAU. It must be something very important to you, obviously. And yeah, like you mentioned, people probably don't know this, but you've mentioned it to me. You're an MMA fighter.
Yeah.
Tell us.
Yeah. So I've been competing for about 4 years, been training for about 6. Yeah, I mean, these days, kind of, getting into my 30s, it's probably more about training and, trying to pass that passion on to my kids and getting them to hit pads. And, I think it's just the activity. So, but yeah, I think my fighting days might be a bit past me now. But no, it's been a journey. It's been awesome. I think I've learned a lot and, just kind of create a bit of a passion for fitness along the way. So, yeah.
Oh, nice. I love that. MMA fighter. Here you go. You got a CEO of Planet Fitness and who is MMA. You don't want to mess with this guy. But look, thank you for sharing that. We're very excited to kind of pick your brains here a little bit because you've got a wealth of experience when it comes to leadership. You've, worked across multiple industries. From reflecting on your experience, what has been some of the biggest lessons that you've learned, especially as a CEO, around leadership?
Yeah, I think early on in my career, I think that I thought I needed to have all the answers, that I needed to be the first one to speak, the person who knew everything. And quite quickly what I realized is actually it's the latter, that it's more about hiring for the skills that I don't have and surrounding myself with people who are smarter than me and are subject matter experts. So I think once I realized that it was a bit of a relief, I think I was quite eager to impress, quite eager to kind of demonstrate some value. And actually what I realized was I just needed to keep being me. And that was not try and throw in too many buzzwords, use simple language, and just relax a bit. I think transitioning into kind of a C-suite role, I think I think the transition can be a little bit, for lack of a better term, frightening, but imposter syndrome. And so for me, it was just learning that, hey, I don't have to have it all together. I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not. And as long as I'm got some form of self-awareness around that, I think, again, hiring for the skills that you don't have is probably one of the most critical pieces. Yeah.
And that's something I admire about leaders that people don't really see or know about is, the courage it takes to step up into a responsibility to now be more responsible for people, for achieving business outcomes. It's huge on your shoulders. It's huge. And obviously you talked about imposter syndrome. So I'm keen to like talk about, how did you navigate that space? Because a lot of people could be feeling that right now.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear what has been the difference that you've noticed between the C-suite leadership versus like middle management and frontline leadership.
Yeah. I'd say probably the biggest difference is nowadays, the more time I have to just stare out a window and think, usually the times where I have the highest value ideas or kind of problem solving moments, as opposed to kind of middle management and frontline leadership. I always thought the way I derive most value was just by being busy all the time. The quicker I could manage my inbox was a signal to me as to how well I was doing with staying on top of my workload. And so it was about transitioning from transactional management, and it was more management than leadership if I reflect on my old approach, into being more of a strategic thinker, strategic role, and getting results through a team, again, of subject matter experts, whether it be a COO with an extensive operations background. I might have a perspective on it, but rather than kind of giving a directive of, here's the destination and here's the way we're going to get there, it was more about, here's the vision, here's the destination, how you get there is up to you. Now, that's not me removing any ownership of how we get there, but it was more about giving the space and autonomy for the people around me in those senior management roles to kind of take a higher degree of ownership, not feel like they've got someone kind of breathing down their neck. Yeah,
I like that. I guess the biggest thing I've learned there was around the strategic thinking. You're now a lot more responsible for bigger problems that you have to try and solve.
Totally.
But I like that approach around, like now you have to help other people see the vision, believe in it, commit to it, but then figure out a way how to achieve it. Like that's where the beauty and the motivation comes from. It's like, here's a goal.
Yeah.
We're all on the same page. How are we going to get there?
Yeah, I think with the vision, I think it's one thing to articulate it. It's another thing to try and get them to understand why. And sometimes they'll disagree. And so I think there is some beauty in trying to develop that vision together. And as cliche as it may sound, look, there will be some deliverables for a business that some people just can't contribute to. But most of the time, being able to articulate the vision about where we're going, but more importantly, why we're going where we are. And I think that has a lot of value for people in terms of drive and motivation and job satisfaction, because people are then able to link what they do on a day-to-day basis to kind of the longest strategic endpoint of the business. And so when there's tough times, I think that really goes a long way. And I think, the vision is only as good as your ability to articulate it. So you may need to say what the vision is or what we're trying to achieve 5 different ways for it to land right with someone. And maybe one conversation, maybe 10. And it may just be finding the right word that they have that aha moment, and then it all falls into place. And I think communication plays a critical element in that, and I think just touching base with people along the way to make sure there's no confusion or misunderstanding about why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously throughout the year, it might be coming back to that vision and having that conversation time and time again. And I guess what you're saying is, as a leader, ultimately you're responsible for the vision, but helping people to be on the same page and commit to it. Because there are moments where they go backwards, right?
Yeah, totally. And, success is never a linear line. You might go around the roundabout 3 times and realize that it's not the third exit, it's the first. And I think it's really, I think it's good when people challenge what that endpoint is or what the destination is. Quite often, I've got team members saying, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about that? And actually, most of the time I haven't. I haven't thought about what they've got to say. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I haven't thought, that idea hasn't come into my mind. And so, rather than just kind of providing direction, it's also about being able to be influenced by kind of their input. So it's kind of shared. And I think that's also how you get better buy-in as well. People feel like they're a part of it and just shaping it together rather than just, you providing direction and then they deliver.
Yeah. Like here's a vision, you hand it over, do as you're told.
Totally.
So basically what you're saying is you want to, make them feel heard, make them feel like they can contribute or they played a part in creating this vision. And you're going to get more commitment out of it because they feel like they're a part of it, right?
That's right. Especially when you get hard moments. It's if they don't feel like they had buy-in, it's very easy, and I remember in my younger years, it was very easy for me to point the finger somewhere else because this was happening to me, not with me, as opposed to developing it together. I've got skin in the game. I feel like I contributed to this being the outcome, and therefore when it's hard, I know, I just need to put my head down and crack on.
Yeah. I want to talk about strategy for a little bit because you talked about, when you level up to the C-suite leadership, it's a whole different ball game, right? You need to be a little bit more strategic. And I think even for like business owners, I think like if that's just a good skill to have. Right? What is your tips around becoming more a strategic thinker? How do you develop a strategic mindset?
For me, it's I think through conversation. I have to talk out an idea with someone. I have to think out loud. I'm not someone who can think inside my own head and then have a clear answer. So I have to be able to talk something through. And I think for me, strategic thinking is really around scenario discussions. So, typically if you're in a C-suite, you're reporting into a board or multiple stakeholders. And most of those stakeholders will be aligned on an outcome for the business or end goal, but there will be varying agendas. And so I think one of the biggest things around that transition into C-suite is being able to understand who are the people in the room, what are their backgrounds, and in a positive way, what are the agendas? So we can make sure that when we're thinking strategically, it's aligned with everyone in the room. Reporting into a board as opposed to one person is quite different. And I know for me, it was quite a big intimidation factor. I think when we talk about strategic thinking, I think my experience has been it's very easy to overcomplicate it. When we talk about developing a strategy or strategic planning, people can get out their pillars and their Venn diagrams, but ultimately, what strategic thinking means for me is we define and we measure where we are now as a starting point, as a baseline performance, and we have a clear vision around where we're going. How we get from point A to point B is where the strategy kind of paints the roadmap, so to speak. And then what are the nodes or the points between point A and point B where we're going to have pit stops and evaluate whether the destination has changed and who needs to come on that journey. And it may be a phased approach. It may be one sprint, And so, again, I'd say that the best way I kind of map that out is through discussion with the team.
I love that. Keep it simple, the strategy. And I love the whole, this is where we are, point A. This is where we want to go, point B. And then figuring out in between is the strategy. Because
if you can't define where you are and you can't define where you're going, then a strategy is useless until you've done those two things,
Well, that's the whole point of a strategy, right? Is to move you forward in progress. So you need to be able to measure and know where you are versus where you're going. In terms of, you talked about, and I love this, imposter syndrome, because you're highlighting the reality that leaders are human beings. And they have all these emotions. There are times where they get a little bit anxious and nervous and, but it's about, in spite of that, those feelings, you're still moving and doing things, right? Tell us about imposter syndrome and advice for people who might be struggling with that.
Well, so maybe I can talk a little bit about my experience with that. So I remember my first corporate role. I'd kind of been working in multi-site management and QSR and operations. And then one day I got accepted for this operations role, and I found myself looking out a glass window in a glass boardroom full of people who looked way more qualified than me, and I felt really, really intimidated. And I was so vigilant and so worried about what I was saying. It almost felt like a bring your son to work day, But what I realized is that everyone in those environments doesn't have all the right answers. Every single person in those rooms has also experienced imposter syndrome. The difference is, people are at different parts on that journey. And so if you're brand new to it, you're going to feel it. But I can guarantee you, if you ask everyone else in the room, they'd also be able to relate at some point. So for me, I think it was just trying not to overthink it, trying not to be someone I wasn't. I think early on in my career, I think what got me my foot in the door into leadership roles was I saw people that were successful, and I just copied their behaviors, their mannerisms, what they said, what they did. I didn't necessarily understand why they did it, but I saw you're successful, I'm just going to mirror that. And then it got me to a point where then I had to start thinking for myself. And that was a gap that was really hard for me to bridge. And it took quite a few years of learning and understanding, okay, now I see why they did what they did. And I think that's where the imposter syndrome was. It was, how can I demonstrate I'm competent at the role without feeling like I have to be someone I'm not? So, yeah. And I think a few years, just a bit of experience under my belt in kind of a corporate environment, and realizing that everyone's still people. Everyone's still had a good weekend. Everyone's got kids. Everyone's losing sleep over kids crying at 2:00 in the morning, or, everyone's got their challenges, and we're all still human.
Yeah. Well, that's what I call empathy, right?
Yeah.
Like looking at from people's perspectives, trying to understand them. But I love that around imposter syndrome. And it sounded like, people struggle with it because sometimes maybe they compare themselves to other people, or compare themselves to this ideal that they need to be. That could be sometimes an illusion or unrealistic expectations they have of themselves.
Totally.
But I love what you said around, looking at people all just learning. We're all just still trying to figure this out. If you look at it from a growth mindset, it's what we call a growth mindset. It's like you're not perfect at it. Every day you're just growing. Find something to improve and improve it.
Totally.
Not perfection. And in terms of, because you mentioned you just looked at other leaders and, kind of copied what they were doing that was right. What were some of the things that you picked up from other leaders that was like, man, that's pretty cool, I'm going to try it, and it actually worked?
I think for me it was one of the ones that stood out was body language and tonality. So if I'm in a room with a team and I'm trying to get buy-in, are my arms crossed? Are my legs crossed? Do I look interested in what people have to say? Am I leaning forward? Am I sitting back? Am I just looking at my phone, just counting the minutes on the clock rather? Or am I asking people how their weekend is? Am I taking a genuine interest? Because I find, to be interesting, you have to be interested. If you show that you're willing to give people your time, people are willing to hear what you've got to say. People are willing to give their time in response. And so I think for me, it was about first finding a way to connect with people from different walks of life, finding out a bit about them. And it's not necessarily how was your weekend, but more open-ended questions, and just probing and prompting, just trying to get more information out of people. The more I can understand about someone, the more I can engage with them, and the more we can work together. So, yeah.
I love that. As leaders, we learn from the mistakes that we make, right? Sometimes our mistakes are our biggest teachers.
Yes.
We get our biggest lessons from them.
Yeah.
Throughout your journey, what have you seen has been some of the biggest lessons for you that's helped you become a better leader?
One, not taking myself so seriously. I think stepping into, kind of entry-level leadership roles, thinking that, it's all business and we don't talk about anything outside of work, and I'm just interested in deliverables. When actually the more I realized I could acknowledge people outside of what they did for the business and more so about them as individuals, the better engagement, the better productivity, the better the relationships. And I think something, I'm still kind of discovering is mistaking momentum for progress. And what I mean by that is always being busy isn't necessarily translating to productivity. Again, I can have a really productive lunch break by simply just going for a walk outside and just trying to ground myself in the day, thinking about what I've got in the afternoon and thinking about who do I need to be for the people in the room when I go back to the office, rather than I'll just work through my lunch break and smash out these emails. I think for me, fundamentally, that was probably the biggest shift. Even as going as far as not having to answer every call when someone calls, thinking about, okay, I don't know, Hannah's calling me. By the way, there's no one called Hannah that works for me or in the business. But am I in a place to be able to answer that call and give her what she's going to need from me? It's okay if the answer is no. I think creating a level of self-awareness is important.
Are there things that you feel like leaders do unknowingly that kind of maybe create a culture within a team that's not productive, that could be a little bit toxic? It could lead to burnout, because of a leader's influence?
Yeah, I think, just reflecting on my own experience in kind of entry level or even middle management roles, you're kind of the conduit between the business or the board or C-suite and people who are working on the front line. And whilst, yes, it's your job to kind of take those deliverables and mold them and deliver them in a way to the team to get them achieved, it's also your job to push back where appropriate. And I think it goes both ways, right? And typically my experience was always it probably went more downstream than upstream, which isn't a bad thing necessarily, but I think you got to have your finger on the pulse. And I think sometimes no is just as good as yes, because the people who have hired you to and trust your judgment. Trust your judgment to deliver on the work that needs to be produced, but also push back when you're under-resourced. And if you do not have the ability to say no and provide context and rationale, then it can lead to burnout, or it can lead to poor retention levels, and that breeds a poor culture.
Yeah, well, if there's anyone that you should trust, it's the ones who are closer to the team and the grassroots.
Yeah, totally.
Right? You definitely want to be listening to them.
Yes.
In terms of what are some warning signs that you can kind of pick up as a leader, or the clues that tell you that your team is starting to get a little bit disengaged or go in the opposite direction?
Yeah. It could be things such as, people who typically didn't call in sick are starting to call in sick. It might be situations of when you strike a conversation with the team, it's negative. It's not as solutions focused as it used to be. Even I think, I think for you to be able to pick up on kind of poor culture or burnout, you kind of have to know your team well, because if you don't have a baseline as to how people act and behave when they're feeling good about work, it's going to be really hard for you to notice when they're not feeling good about work. So unless you've worked and spent time shoulder to shoulder at the coalface on the front line, and you see how they behave, how they act, how they say hi to people in the morning, how they carry themselves, unless you can see what that looks like from a normal baseline perspective, you're not going to notice when it starts to go sideways.
Yeah. How useful are tools they are useful, but in your opinion, things like, personality assessment tools like the Myers-Briggs and other tools that tell you about your staff's personalities, their motivation, even tools like feedback surveys, what tools have you found useful helping you understand your team a little bit better so that way you can support them?
Yeah, I think feedback surveys have a place. I think when you're talking about a large organization, feedback surveys are a good way to, confirm, kind of where culture sits by asking very targeted questions, especially if you think about scale. If you've got over 100 employees, I think a feedback survey has its place, but it needs to be done in tandem with a personal touch point. So if you've got 100 staff, you would assume there's probably going to be at least 10 line managers roughly. And I would expect that those line managers are at least having a one-on-one catch up weekly or fortnightly over a coffee not purely just business focused. Because what people feel comfortable putting in a survey can and very often is quite different to what they'll say if you take them out for a coffee and you get them relaxed and you just have an honest conversation. And I think that feedback verbatim is really, really valuable.
Yeah. Because there's only so much a CEO can do on their own, right? Like
Yeah.
you definitely rely on other leaders.
Yeah. I think I take quite a high interest in my direct teams. I take quite a high interest in how my team is feeling in the organization. And by extension, I'd expect that they'd do the same for their teams and their staff. But it's a trickle-down effect. And by the conversations I have, by what I discuss in phone calls, I'm constantly suggesting to them what I see as being the priority. And if I'm never asking genuinely, how are you? How are the kids? How was the weekend? What do you need less of? What do you need more of from me? If I'm not asking those questions, it's always purely business. Then they will take that as a signal as to what they need to discuss with their teams about. So I think again, a survey has its place, but demonstrating vulnerability and showing an interest in them as people has a trickle down effect. And people will make micro decisions based on that feedback on a day-to-day basis, rather than needing to do a feedback survey every 6 months and then trying to fix issues that have accumulated over time at scale. Yeah.
Wow. As a leader, what do you do personally, especially as a CEO, and you've got hundreds of staff now that you're responsible for? And let's be honest, you probably won't be able to like spend time with all of them, right? How do you keep an organization and people within that organization motivated? What can a leader do, especially at the C-suite level?
Yeah, I think the C-suite level, fundamentally, you're employing people who it's not their first rodeo, so to speak. They have worked in senior leadership roles before, and so there's quite a high level of autonomy that comes with that. I think for me, whether you're selling a product or service, it is people business, whether it's customers, patients, or team members. And because fundamentally it's a people business, my view is that should be the priority. And I'm not joking when I say if I get 7 emails from staff that might be 3 teams detached, I'll reply to those 7 people before I touch any other piece of work. Because 3 out of those 7 emails, my response might be the difference as to whether they stay in the organization or not. And what are the ripple effects of their exit going to be? And so if I'm 1 email away from losing 4 or 5 team members, I may not be, but by taking that mentality, I think it serves the business and its people quite well.
Hey, quick break. If you're an employer or business owner who's passionate about investing in your people, Zeducation can help. We're a trusted training provider offering literacy and numeracy programs to build essential skills alongside leadership, communication, conflict management, and even tech training in Microsoft Excel and AI. We also provide financial education on budgeting, home ownership, and retirement, as well as personal well-being programs. Plus, we deliver cultural diversity training to help create more inclusive and high-performing workplaces. Not sure what your people need? That's okay. We can help with that too. We offer needs analysis to identify skill gaps and ensure all training aligns with your business goals, developing the right capabilities to drive real success. What makes us even more cooler, we're a proudly Pacifica and Māori-owned business, and we know how to truly engage and empower our people. So if you're ready to level up your team, get in touch with us today at www.zeducation.co.nz. Now, back to the episode.
Yeah.
Well, that is powerful. And to put things into perspective, an email or a response to someone's question can have a ripple effect on teams
Absolutely.
and people, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of let's say you've got a team that might be struggling, disengaged. Like the reality is, as people, sometimes we have that. As leaders, sometimes we experience that. What's your advice around turning those teams around? What can a leader start doing to start moving the dial in the right direction?
Yeah. Let's assume you've come into a new organization and you're getting this feedback anecdotally from others. The first thing I would say is don't take other people's word from it. Go and experience it yourself. Go and have the conversations. If you're working in retail or you're working in hospitality, don't go work one shift. You need to go spend a couple of weeks, because people will show you a version of themselves that probably wouldn't be the same as if you'd spent a couple of weeks. And what that does is it means you can build rapport. You establish trust. It gives you an opportunity to kind of insert yourself and into the teams and show them that you're just a person as well. And that encourages vulnerability and approachability. And then you get to observe all of the little micro interactions. Who is showing signs of leadership skills, but has been working in the same position for the last 2 years. Who's going above and beyond, but you've never seen the line manager give any praise? Who's the person who's turning up to work really late, wanting a pay rise for 2 years, but is underperforming? It's all of these little micro interactions and snapshots accumulatively that is going to provide you as the leader a really clear view as to what the problems are and where they've come from. And ultimately, if I, as the manager or leader, am responsible for solving it, then I, as the leader or manager, need to be the one responsible for identifying the causes.
So let's talk about that for a little bit, because some leaders will experience working with someone who's not performing for whatever reason, right? And you talked about, let's reverse engineer this a little bit. What are some of the causes that's leading to this?
Totally.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that advice? Any tips for leaders who might be struggling with people in their team who are underperforming?
Yeah. My experience has been underperformance comes from one of two ends. One is it's a technical skill set or a lack of training that is creating underperformance, or it's a choice and it's related to attitude. Or maybe it's both. Where it comes to a lack of training or a lack of kind of technical skill set, that is something that can always be trained. There's, if you've got systems, processes, operations, training documents, sources of truth you can refer back to help upskill. That typically is kind of the, not easier, but it's a little bit more simplistic in the approach to try and create an improvement. When we're talking about an attitude or where it's a choice, where someone has the technical skills, but they're choosing not to perform, that's a little bit more tricky, because it could be related to culture, it could be related to them being disengaged, or it simply may be that actually the business is no longer the right fit for them. And so that's where having the soft skills to manage the conversation and create a space where people can, again, feel vulnerable to kind of talk about what's going on for them is important. I'd say it's always one of those two. Really, yeah.
I like that. Whether it's something to do with training or capability or technical skills, or whether it's something to do with attitude or desire.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Whatever the issue is, it's your problem to solve as a leader.
That's
self-support.
right.
I like that.
Yeah.
What can a leader, because you've got a lot of experience, especially in the middle management and frontline leadership as well. So you've got a lot of experience working with people directly, right? What have you seen, or any advice around, what leaders can do daily that they can start doing now, embed daily, or systems they can put in place to help build a winning culture, high-performing teams?
Yeah, I think it all starts with the employment journey. So what were the interview questions? Because that's kind of setting the tone for what their employment experience is going to be like. And fundamentally, whilst the interview may be, are they the right fit as an employee? Are you the right fit as an employer? Because it's a partnership. Can you meet their expectations? And you can't answer that question unless you've asked it. So what are their expectations? They may not know, but at least you kind of get the cogs turning. What do I expect? Because they will have needs that we need to meet as an employer. They may not be aware of them in front of mind, but when they're not met, there'll be underperformance or they'll communicate those, and you've got a problem down the way to solve. So I think trying to identify what are the needs that need to be met on both sides. I think if we're talking about a franchise business model, for example, where you are taking something you do really, really well and you're trying to replicate it at scale, having standardized systems and processes is really the key. It's about every single employee that comes into the business has the same level of training by people who are trained to train others, because training in of itself is a skill. Whether you are a visual learner or you're a verbal learner or you like to read or you need a video, being able to identify what works best for individuals is really, really important. Some people learn quicker than others. Also, it's role dependent. So I think that's really critical. And having the training in blocks, so it's a staged progression. So if you've got 5 or 6 roles within a business that you're expecting this person to deliver on, block those out, itemize every single task, making sure that each task is explained where it sits in the priorities, why it's important, how you do this task. You've got documented that it was communicated, it was explained, they understand it, they've signed it off. That gets put in a folder. Now, yes, there's a piece here, it's about accountability, but it's also about being able to celebrate successes and show status and progression. If we talk about what are the motivations for staff, one of them is seeing a future for themselves in the business. And being able to, say, okay, cool, I started off on point of sale. I can see in 6 months' time, I can start my shift manager training or my store manager training or move into an area manager role. I think that's really, really important. That's what training can signal. What I think the other thing, particularly team leaders, can do on a daily basis, and I see a tendency for people who are conflict averse to lean away from it, is to celebrate successes in the moment, but also address areas of improvement in the moment too. And the reason why I think that's important is if you're celebrating successes in the moment and you do it around a team, you are reaffirming to everyone who heard it what we value as an organization, or what kind of things we're going to celebrate. On the other side of that, if someone makes a mistake, pulling them aside and separately from everyone else and just saying, hey, next time do X, Y, Z, and here's why, is really, really important, because every time you give feedback, you're not coming down on them hard. A lot of it's to do with the delivery. But if there are, say, 10 areas of improvement over the space of a month, that's 10 opportunities where they can improve, as opposed to consolidating all the feedback to doing it in 6 months' time. And you've got a big, long list you paint to someone. It can be quite intimidating and pretty unmotivating, because, I don't know about you, but I'd be thinking, well, why didn't someone tell me? So identifying it in the moment, the praise or the critique coming in the moment as well. So we can celebrate the wins, but also you're just providing an opportunity for continuous development and improvement.
Nice. So basically what you're saying is, high performing teams starts at who you let in through the front door.
Totally. Yeah.
All right. And having a proper process for finding the right people and asking the right questions, understanding the needs on both sides, business needs versus personal needs, and where the alignment might be. But I also like around, obviously just embedding training into the day-to-day, whether it's small, whether it's a lot more structured. And then also part of the high-performing team is praising success, acknowledgement, because that leads to more motivation, but also a bit of correction as well, or realignment when things go off track, right? And that makes sense. And I can imagine for some leaders, it might be scary to give feedback, especially, it's easier to give praise, and it's harder to give correction. What's your advice around, correction, and how do you communicate that as a leader?
Look, I think correction should feel pretty comfortable and natural if you have the rapport. If you don't have the rapport, it probably signals you're not spending enough time with them. If you're having weekly check-ins where it's casual, you know them well, you can joke, you've got that relationship established, it should be so easy to pull someone aside and say, hey, I really appreciate how you swept that floor, but just next time, could you just focus on this area? Awesome, thanks. Right? You've given the correction. Really, really easy to do. But if you don't have the rapport, probably going to overthink it. How do I deliver this? What are they going to think? What are they going to say? But you should already know them by the time you have to do that. If you're worried about it, I think sometimes planning the conversation in your head first and thinking about, okay, if I was to put myself in their shoes and I was to receive the message the way I intend to give it, how would I feel? And usually, if you think you've got it right, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And it's also okay to make a mistake. It's okay for it not to go well, particularly if you're in first line kind of leadership roles. And sometimes biting the bullet and acknowledging it, saying, hey, look, I'm feeling a little bit awkward about this, because you're doing such a good job, but I just need to point out this thing here, yada, yada, yada. Sometimes biting the bullet about and just say, I feel a little bit anxious about talking to you. It can really personalize it and make it easy for both parties. Yeah.
I like that. I like what you said around there. It feels a lot more natural to give correction or less intimidating and scary if you have rapport with somebody. I don't know if you've heard of Patrick Lencioni.
No, I haven't.
He's an author, speaker. He's published several books. One in particular that I like is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Right.
So it's this pyramid, and then at the foundation, the most important is trust. And he uses the example of like if you like gangs, they do the same thing. Like you've got to prove that we can trust you. Like you've got to do something.
Yeah.
And then we can accept you. Like trust is foundation. Without trust, accountability, commitment, attention to results, everything just crumbles.
Yes.
Even conflict.
Yeah.
Like conflict can still be a good thing. Like healthy conflict, right? But if there is no trust, that conflict won't be taken that way. So I guess trust is very important, right? As a leader, what's your advice around building that trust and that rapport with somebody?
Yeah. I think it should be number one. I think if you don't, I agree with what you're saying around conflict. I think if any team goes for a full year and doesn't have conflict, that tells me that they've got problems. There should be disagreement. There should be challenge. It should be robust. There should be disagreement. Otherwise, tells me there's probably some deeper rooted challenges, probably around trust. Do I feel comfortable enough to voice my honest opinion or give feedback to this person? If you don't feel, I talk about psychological safety. If I don't feel safe to give my perspective because I've been shut down before, then sometimes you can end up, you think you've got no pushback, you must be doing the right thing, when actually people have plenty to say. You just don't, to your point, they just don't have the trust built, so they don't say anything and it just falls over. So I think trust is fundamentally it's number one. And as I said, I think getting to know your team, understanding what motivates them. And people are motivated by different things. For some it might be praise. Individually, it might be praise in front of their peers. For others, it might be work-life balance. It may be the paycheck. It may be career progression. And also understanding how that will change over time. So, 18 years old, I might be motivated by my take-home pay. At 33, when I've got 5 kids, it may be work-life balance. And I think it's really important that if we don't know, we ask, what motivates you? Rather than just assuming, because if you give everyone the same type of praise, or you're trying to reward good performance with a blanket approach, chances are, it's a bit like grabbing a handful of darts and throwing them at a dartboard. A couple might hit the bullseye, but the rest kind of are a bit scattered and probably aren't as targeted as they could have been, right? So I think it's good. I think praise and rewarding performance has to be done individually.
Yeah, nice. I like that. I want to go back into the boardroom for a little bit.
Yeah.
Especially when you're starting to talk about strategy, because that strategy is going to affect everybody.
Yeah.
Because everybody has to help achieve that vision for us. So how important is it to have things like values? Because some of the audience that listen to our podcast are employers.
Yeah.
Obviously values help us to achieve the strategy. What can you talk around the importance about that? Because we want it to be more than just words on a poster that you put in the staff room.
Yeah.
Right? Or just one-off conversation that we have and then people forget about it. We don't talk about it again.
Yeah.
Like tell us about the importance of values. How do you determine the right values that you want everyone to start following?
Yes. So this is pretty close to my heart because I've seen it done very well and done very poor. And it's, to be blunt, whenever there is a financial interest, values shift. Or sorry, let me repaint that. I think in a business context, sometimes it can be challenging to keep values front of mind. And the reason I say that is because, it's a bit like, just to do an analogy, the idea of running a marathon may seem fantastic, exciting. But when you're 33 kilometers deep into that, it's very hard to remain positive and idealistic about how it's going to feel and sense of achievement. I think it's very similar in business. When you're starting a business or things are going very well and you sit around a boardroom table and you brainstorm, talk about values, and you land on a couple, that's great. But when you're in the third financial quarter of the year and your EBITDA is tracking 7 points below budget, are your values still going to be top of mind? Are you still going to behave and treat others and make decisions that are grounded in your values at that point? And I think that is a very uncomfortable conversation that a lot of businesses need to have. Is when things are going well, yeah, values top of mind. But when things aren't going well, are you still going to make decisions with values top of mind? So what I would say is have the uncomfortable conversation. I think values are absolutely critical about what our expectations of each other are, how we're going to treat others, how we're going to treat our customers, and what are our priorities. Ultimately, I think that's what values will drive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. It just takes me back to my early days when I left my corporate job to get into business, and then you start creating a vision and mission for the first time, and then you get better at over time. Yeah. But at the time we're like, values. And I think one of the values that really worked for us was being human. Like when mistakes happen or conflict happens, we come back to that value, but like, hey, it's part of being human.
Yeah.
So let's embrace it. And then how we go from it.
I like that.
I like that because, what I've learned from you is your values can't be just something when things are going right. Like your values have got to be able to save you when things are going wrong.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think for me, kind of my number one value in business and in life has always been integrity. I think your word is your bond, and if you say you're going to do something, do it. And that kind of extends to, talk about integrity and talk about, the way I kind of apply that in a business context is always do the right thing, even if no one's around to watch, because deep down, you know whether you did the right thing. And what I've learned kind of, working in C-suite roles is to trust my gut and intuition more and more. Yes, there's a place for data-driven decisions. Absolutely. But if we're not talking about a P&L, we're not talking about a balance sheet. If we're talking about, am I signing a service level agreement with a company that uses slave labor in China to manufacture clothing? Okay, cool. It's 20% cheaper. Cool, it's going to give me 5% more to my bottom line. But what does my gut tell me? Is this the right thing to do? Morally, is it the right thing to do by our values? No one else may know, but I'll know. Is it the right decision? And so that's a good example I'll give where, you can have competing motivations, but that's where your values should be the bottom line.
Oh, I like that. Now you're making me think, personal values versus company values.
Yeah.
Right. And you talked about your personal value, which is integrity.
Yes.
But you can still bring that into the workplace. I mean, it just makes sense, right?
Absolutely.
Like, how do you stay authentic? How do you stay true to who you are as a leader? Like without having to conform or bend just to please the directors, etc.
Yeah. I think a lot of it has to do with the organization that you attach yourself to. And I choose those words very intentionally because, as you move up through leadership, you think about what your role is. Your role, and I'm sure I'm taking this from someone else, your role is to make very few high quality, high value decisions every day. Your job is no longer writing 50 emails, monitoring a Gantt chart, making sure that actions are delivered. You move from doing the work to getting the work done through others, and the role becomes more intense as you move up, higher expectations and deliverables. I think having an anchor. So for me, what I learned from someone a long time ago was to have a physical cue that I could do, whether it be in a meeting, whether it be in a planning session on the way home, that would ground me back to who I am outside of my job. And if I felt any discomfort and feeling like I had to be someone I wasn't, there was an anchor a physical cue I could use to ground myself, bring myself back into the present moment, and just be me. And look, there's been, I know people that have been in roles and realized after many years that they couldn't figure out where this internal conflict or struggle was coming from. It simply was that the business wasn't the right fit for them. And I think people's their default assumption is that they need to conform to the business. Very often it's actually the reverse, or you just need to disengage and find a company that will value you for you as the individual. And a lot of it also happens to be, it comes with experience around what business models work well for you. Franchise model, corporate model, entrepreneurial, a startup, private equity, joint venture. There's going to be different motivations and different types of stakeholders in those business environments. And sometimes you just got to taste everything from the buffet to figure out which you like, what conforms to you, what doesn't. And this is why I say an interview is a two-way process. You may want to do reference checks on the employer, not just on the employee, right? Do you want to engage with them? Because ultimately you're providing them value. Do you want to work for this person or this organization? Yeah.
That's a big decision for someone to make, right? Like, because you're dedicating a part of your life and a lot of your time to help this business achieve what they want to.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I like that, like be picky with who you choose to work with.
Yeah.
Or the company that you want to go work for. So I guess if someone's looking for a company or applying for jobs, because a lot of our audience part of them are job seekers or looking to grow in their professional career. If they're looking for a company, what's your advice around things that they should look for or questions they should ask to make sure they pick the right one?
Yeah. I think getting really, really clear on what your motivations are to work for a business. So, for example, if you like the values that are on their website, or you've got a technical degree and this is your foot in the door into an industry like architecture or something, that's great. If it was the money, that's also okay too. But I think you've got to think two steps ahead, which is if you're chasing the money, that's fine. Everyone's got to pay bills. But if you don't end up liking the job, you will always be asking for more and more money to justify you staying in a role that you don't like. And that it will never be enough. It'll never be enough because the job does not align with you as a person. So the advice I'd have is if you're applying within a large organization, get on LinkedIn, have a look and see who else works in the business. Look at their bios, look at the types of people they are. I think having a good stalk goes a long way. And it's okay to message, someone on LinkedIn and say, hey, look, I've applied for this role, just reaching out. Can you tell me a little bit about what it's like to work for company XYZ? I think if anything, it sends the right signals to employer. You're doing your due diligence. You see this as a long-term commitment. You're not just, blasé about it. I think it goes a long way.
Yeah. And things with like ChatGPT, AI, it makes it easier to do background research on a company. Yes. And then also be like, look, this is my goal. This is the company. Is there any alignment? Do you have any recommendation? You don't have to follow AI, but I do like the whole reaching out to a person in that industry, in that company, ask questions, right? Yeah. To help you make that decision, because it's a big decision. Yeah. So as we draw closer to the end of our podcast, my friend, you've been so generous with, your experience around leadership and your thoughts. And I thank you for that. I want to talk to our leaders out there, people who are thinking about becoming leaders, like what's your advice around, because in your experience, you've gone from frontline leadership to middle management to the C-suite. So you know a lot about that journey. If someone wants to move up the corporate ladder, for a lack of better words, what's your advice around what they could do to help progress and move up into more leadership roles? Yeah,
look, I think, what would I say? I would say relax. I would say you do not have to have all the answers. Now, yes, there is, depending on the business, sometimes you do have to say the right things in front of the right people. As controversial as it will sound, sometimes there are buzzwords and uncommunicated expectations. No one wants to talk about that, but it exists. Fundamentally, it exists. And what is required of you at a frontline leadership role will be different at middle management, and it will be different at C-suite. I think it's important to trust the people that promote you or trust the people that hire you, that they like what they see in you now, not the person you think you have to be for the role you're stepping into. I think that's fundamental. I don't like the term fake it until you make it, but there is something to be said for act as the person you want to be, because there'll be a part of you that recognizes that and you will just organically shift into that person. But yeah, relax. You don't have to use big fancy words, and just keep it simple. Your ideas are only as good as your ability to articulate them. If you've got a team, it's more about making sure, again, you've got a common goal that's been developed. You know why you're heading. The team knows why it's important, and you've got ways to measure and check in with the team. If you can do those things, I think it's just a matter of time.
Well, I love that. And the biggest takeaway or words of encouragement you want our listeners to take away from our conversation today, if there was one thing that you could give them, what would it be?
What would it be? I would say focus on people. Focus on people because, again, whether it's customers or staff, you are selling a product or you're delivering a service, and that requires people to purchase or people to deliver that. And if you know your team well, and you know what motivates them, it means that you can get the best out of people, and in turn they'll do the best by you as a leader. Yeah.
Love that. Nice way to end the podcast episode today, my friend. Thank you again so much for sharing your leadership journey and your experience and tips with us. We're much better for it. All the best.
Thanks, man. Cheers. Cool.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. If this conversation gave you something valuable, do me a favor. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, hit the follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. This show is all about helping you unleash your greatness, and the more we grow, the more we can bring you content that truly makes an impact. Thanks for being part of the Zeducation podcast. Let's keep pushing forward, and I'll see you next time.